Welcome to this explainer. So, for the last 5 months, the most critical 21 miles of water on Earth have been slammed shut. But now, after this unprecedented, downright historic closure, a brand new agreement has emerged that demands our focused attention. We are looking at what could be a massive turning point for both global energy and maritime law.
Okay, let's dive right into this. You've probably seen the breaking headlines, right? On the surface, they're all telling us that the Strait of Hormuz is finally reopening, but we really need to look a little closer here. Has the strait actually reopened, or has a closure simply been converted into a rigid permission system? That is the central mystery we're unpacking today, and the answer completely changes how we view global trade.
To really wrap our heads around why this matters so deeply, just consider this staggering number: 20 million. That represents the massive volume of daily barrels of oil that normally pass through this 21-mile-wide gate. We're talking about more than a quarter of all seaborne oil trade globally flowing through a space you could literally drive across in half an hour. When that flow stops, industries all over the globe feel the immediate, paralyzing squeeze. And, it's not just oil. Alongside that immense amount of crude, 1/5 of the entire world's liquefied natural gas, primarily originating from Qatar, relies heavily on these exact same two narrow shipping lanes. Qatar is one of the world's top LNG exporters, and without this route, their ability to supply energy-hungry markets in Asia and Europe is severely bottlenecked. The stability of the whole global energy market basically hinges on this tiny geographical thread. Let's move to the timeline and see how this all builds, because the fallout here is just breathtaking. On February 28, 2026, the strait closed following airstrikes. The economic shockwave, it was instant. By March 8th, Brent crude crossed $100, peaking at an agonizing $126 by mid-March. And the human cost is just as severe. By April 21st, a staggering 20,000 mariners were left completely stranded on vessels stuck inside the Gulf.
Which brings us to Section 1, the draft deal, Iran, Oman, and the new coordinates. After more than 3 weeks of intense, behind-closed-doors negotiations, Iran and Oman, the two states bordering the strait, have proposed a way forward.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact mechanics of what they've proposed. Based on the finalized draft described to the Associated Press, they've designed a highly specific, mechanically structured corridor. Ships entering the Gulf would be required to use an Iranian-controlled route, while outbound ships would use an Omani-controlled route. This whole thing is set for an initial 60-day term, with an agreement of no tolls during this period and a strict commitment to clear mines from the main lane within the first 30 days. But hold on, here is a reality check we absolutely cannot ignore. As of August 7th, 2026, nothing, and I mean nothing, has been officially signed. It's still just a draft awaiting approval from Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. Furthermore, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is notably absent from the negotiating delegation. And remember, we've been here before. A previous memorandum of understanding signed on June 17th failed to fold. So, significant political hurdles in Tehran definitely still remain.
This leads us right into Section 2, Rights versus Permissions, the UNCLOS paradigm shift. See, the story is no longer just about ships moving through water, it's fundamentally about international rules and who gets to make them.
So the crucial point here is understanding a massive legal difference. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, ships enjoy transit passage. That is an internationally recognized right held by the ship, and it cannot be suspended. But what we're looking at now with these new coordinates, that is a negotiated corridor. That's not a right. It's a conditional renegotiable arrangement granted by a coastal state. It completely flips the entire power dynamic.
And the legal irony here? It's genuinely fascinating. Iran signed but never actually ratified UNCLOS, claiming that transit passage isn't binding customary international law. Meanwhile, the United States isn't a party to the treaty either. Both principal actors are essentially arguing from entirely outside the treaty they're debating over, which leaves the whole legal paradigm highly contested and, frankly, pretty ambiguous.
All right, let's step away from government diplomacy for a second and look at the free market in Section 3, the insurance reality, underwriters decide. Because ultimately, politicians won't be the ones deciding if this strait is truly open. The underwriters who price the risk of sailing through it will.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer financial friction at play. Before the crisis, a war risk premium was just a fraction of a percent, costing maybe $110,000 to $165,000 for a very large crude carrier. Today, it sits at roughly 1% of the whole value. To put that into perspective, that translates to a massive $1.1 million premium for a single transit. Ship owners are absolutely going to hesitate at that price tag. Just listen to how the Japanese carrier MOL stated it perfectly. Vessels will not resume normal Hormuz transits until a deal is material and safety is demonstrated in practice on the water. Corporate carriers, they don't care about a signed piece of paper or big political announcements. They need months of uneventful voyages to convince underwriters to finally lower those premiums.
And unfortunately for everyone, those uneventful voyages, they aren't happening yet. Take a look at this recent incident. On August 5th, the exact same day the corridor coordinates were announced, Yemen's Houthis claimed a ballistic missile strike on a Saudi oil tanker in the Gulf of Aden. The surrounding waters remain incredibly volatile, and you can be sure underwriters are closely reading these daily headlines.
So, this brings us to Section 4, 2 readings of the deal, a non-partisan analysis of the corridor. In this explainer, we remain entirely neutral. We're not here to choose between the two competing geopolitical interpretations of this agreement. Instead, we're going to objectively look at the two very different ways the maritime community is viewing this draft.
On one hand, you've got pragmatic de-escalation. This view is all about the practical relief. An imperfect, negotiated corridor is vastly better than a completely closed strait. It immediately gets vital oil moving and allows 20,000 stranded mariners to finally go home to their families. But then, on the other hand, you have codified coercion. This view warns of a deeply dangerous precedent. It suggests that by agreeing to this, the world is essentially rewarding the forceful closure of a global choke point by allowing a coastal state to permanently administer and control the route. And that tension leads right into our final area of focus, Section 5. What happens on day 61? Tolls, escapes, and precedents. Remember, the proposed deal is only a 60-day trial period. The unresolved complications of what happens when that clock runs out are severe. Because the biggest unresolved issue hanging over all of this is the prospect of a toll. Iran is demanding service fees, which they've framed as necessary payments for security and environmental protection. Meanwhile, the United States rejects any charges outright. So, for now, tolls are merely deferred, not permanently ruled out. And history shows us that when passage through a choke point shifts from being a universal right to a granted favor, it inevitably acquires a price tag.
Now, some geopolitical analysts point to bypass pipelines as this kind of potential escape hatch, but look at the scale here. The capacities of the Saudi Petroline and the UAE's ADICOT pipeline are completely, utterly dwarfed by the staggering 20 million barrel daily capacity of a fully operational Strait of Hormuz. The reality is pretty stark, though. These bypass pipelines, they were built to handle short, temporary disruptions. They simply cannot replace the strait in a prolonged 5-month geopolitical crisis. The global economy still fundamentally, undeniably relies on this narrow waterway being open. Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to take away today. If this draft is signed, sure, ships will likely move again. Oil prices may fall, and crews will finally go home. But look closely at the legal paradigm shift being set into motion here. When a vital global waterway reopens strictly on someone's negotiated terms, is it still truly open? Or has closing a choke point just been validated as a highly effective, permanently altering negotiating tactic? Think about what happens when other states, at other narrow places around the world, start taking notes. Thank you for joining this explainer. Keep questioning the headlines, and we'll see you next time.